Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
Achtung, Achtung! Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland, your Second World War podcast. Jim, we've just miraculously between us brought the war to an end in Western Europe, haven't we? And I feel like we're basking in the aftermath.
Yeah, exactly. And I should also say that if my audio quality sounds a little bit off, it's because I'm in my brother's study in London. He is off gallivanting around Ireland doing his Irish stuff. And although he's got the most sophisticated audio equipment known to man, I can't get it to work. So apologies for everyone. But yes, we've got through the other side, haven't we? VE Day has been and gone. And now, of course, that's great news because it means we can go back to 1940 and start all over again.
Well, no, there's a bit of mopping up to do. And of course, as everyone knows, and I mean, there's been one too many messages on social media that I've had saying, you know, the war in Japan's still going on, don't you? It's like, yes, I do. Yes. And in fact, the thing we've made a point of making a point about, actually, and certainly, and all the coverage we did, we went on about how the war with Japan was still hanging heavy and all that.
I got comments to that effect saying, "Very glad that you mentioned that."
Exactly. So, all right, all these people going off early on us. I think it's worth bearing. I mean, what we might do. I think we'll do today. There's stuff to talk about too. Is trot through what is still kind of going on because, first of all, in Europe, there's a lot happening in the sort of fallout of the end of the war because the fighting hasn't stopped and the sort of political realignment is now underway. So
don't forget, there was that huge showdown going on in Prague.
Yes,
until 10th, 11th of May, didn't it? Went on beyond VE Day.
Exactly, last capital to be liberated, so on.
Because our friend Martin Davidson's grandfather narrowly escaped being murdered by Czechs.
Yeah,
at the end of the war, because he was a Gestapo agent in Prague.
Oh, yes, of course he was.
And he managed to get away with it.
Blimey.
Live out his life and then try and recruit Martin as a teenager in Edinburgh in the 1970s. Just amazing.
It's absolutely incredible, isn't it? So Prague, it's the 9th of May, isn't it, that Prague is liberated. And then there's still other stuff rumbling on. I think one of the things that's really interesting is on the 14th of May, the provisional government of Austria nullifies the 1938 Anschluss. I always find it not funny or comical, but that they actually have to do this, that they actually have to put pen to paper and go, it
was all a big mistake. We didn't mean it.
Yeah. And the other way of looking at it, and I think what we've been talking about of late, about thinking of the Soviet Union as Russian in its sort of character, if you want, what are the continuities in Russian power? There's Tsarist Russia, there's Soviet Russia, and we've modern Russia now.
Well, the Soviet Union is Imperial Russia, isn't it, in a communist form?
Well, yeah, which I think makes it really interesting. The Soviets are in Austria, aren't they? They've taken Vienna. If that's the 19th century, if that's your 19th century geopolitical outcome, the way Stalin might well be viewing it, that's a massive thing, isn't it? Taken the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, even though that doesn't exist. It's just sort of the flag posts of it all. And there is a moment, isn't there?
The symbolism of this. I mean, Vienna is Vienna. It's the centre of, as you say, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This is the Habsburgs. This is Emperor Charles V, etc.
Precisely. And I think if you start thinking about things in that context, it starts to look different. And also, you can see it's not just about a buffer zone for the Soviet at the end of the war. It's about redrawing the map in a Russian imperial form that's a response to, centuries of Austrian imperialism. It's in that context.
Yes, and let's not forget that until 1919, Poland was split between Prussia, Austria, and Russia. And let's not also forget that Lviv was called something completely different. Lemberg, I think it was, under Austria, when it was Austrian.
Yeah. Well, and then it's Lvov for a bit, and then it's Lviv. I mean, the point is, though, if you put the Russians in that context, the Soviets in that context, Stalin's concerns, although they're framed in the language of, class war and post-Bolshevist Stalinist Marxism. I mean, even these labels start to sound like Judean People's Front, don't they? They start to sound Python-esque. But even though his language is framed in those terms, what he's doing is very much in the context of a sort of 19th century redrawing balance of power thing. There is that suggestion, as he said, the emperor got to Paris in 1815. There were Russian troops in
I just do not in any way buy the kind of, there's just paranoia and they want a buffer zone against Europe and all the rest of it. Well, they might want that, but basically he just wants to control all of Europe.
Yeah. And you can again from his point of view.
I mean, let's not beat around the bush. That's the ambition for the Soviet Union, for Russia.
Yeah. Yes, for Russia, the Soviet Union, whichever you look at it. Because after all, the Soviet Union inherits Russia's interests, doesn't it? So, which seem to be to want to control Europe. That seems to be Russia's interest.
Well, the point about the Soviet Union is it is a union of Soviet states. But let's not beat around the bush. The daddy figure in this is Russia, Mother Russia.
And it's been a great patriotic war rather than a Bolshevist war or whatever. Stalin is prepared to completely reframe it as a patriotic effort, which I think then for all the sub-countries within the Soviet Union, who are they being patriotic to? If you're Ukrainian, who are you fighting for, actually? Or Belarusian or Kazakh?
Most Ukrainians aren't any friend of Stalin, that's for sure.
Well, see, this is what's interesting. It's so interesting, is that
not after the
Holodomor. Yeah, exactly. But
Russia's
there's so many things
in the 1930s and
I mean, so many things though that are expedient in the situation where you're attacked. That it's really, really interesting. But I think it's Stalin's post-war settlement, isn't it? The Cold War. That the idea that he redraws all the ethnic boundaries in Eastern Europe. He builds a new empire around those new ethnic boundaries. He moves Poland west. He evacuates millions of Germans. So he's obviously just trying to tidy things up, because obviously the multi-ethnic legacy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire is something he's just simply not interested in entertaining ever again, isn't it? It's
no. And deaths in the Soviet Union amount to around 26.5 million.
Yeah.
And Stalin settles on 7.5 million, which I think is really, really interesting. So, and enough to seem heroic, but not so big that it seems wasteful. I mean, it's just astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, meanwhile, on the 16th of May, there's the Battle of Malacca Strait, or the Battle of Penang. Now, this is the Royal Navy.
Let's not forget, people, that the Royal Navy's Pacific Fleet was formed in August 1944 at the height of the Normandy battle. This extra force, this extra huge naval effort was created and played a full part right through to the end of the war. So we might not have had troops landing on Japanese islands and what have you, but we certainly played our part out there. And that, of course, includes aircraft carriers and naval aviators and so on.
Yeah.
And Malacca Strait, the Battle of the Strait is part of this.
How big is the Navy, the Pacific Fleet?
It's substantial.
The Royal Navy ships are very different to American ships, aren't they? So they're sort of shorter range prospects. So kind of have to operate by themselves, don't they? Integrating with the Americans is more difficult, isn't it? That's one of the sort of challenges that arises. But this battle, Malacca Strait, it's 5 British destroyers attacking at night against the Japanese heavy cruiser Harugo and a destroyer called Kamikaze. Imagine that. Dear Mum, dear Dad, I've been posted to a ship called Kamikaze. I mean, I don't know if it's quite taken on that meaning, at that point. Things are going very... and JR, our producer, his grandfather served in the Pacific Fleet on a carrier. How about that?
Well, what the Pacific Fleet did have was 134 support vessels because it had to be self-sufficient.
There we are.
And guess who is Commander-in-Chief of the BPF?
I don't know, Jim. Who
Admiral
is
Sir Bruce Fraser.
Oh!
Bruce Fraser, our old friend.
Fantastic. So it's 6 fleet carriers, 4 light carriers, 2 aircraft maintenance carriers, 9 escort carriers, with a total of more than 750 aircraft.
5 battleships, 11 cruisers.
35 destroyers, 14 frigates.
That is not a small fleet.
No, it's not. I mean, it's considerably larger than the current British Navy. I just want to... Any Matlows out there listening? We're not...
Well, it's 19 aircraft carriers. 5 battleships as well. That's a massive force.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Unbelievable.
Well, we should do a whole thing on the Pacific Fleet, shouldn't we?
31 submarines.
Get in there.
That suggests, doesn't it, that you've won the Battle of the Atlantic.
And you can afford to spread your wings a little bit.
The channel, you could afford to send stuff east. I mean, that is really quite something.
Well, for those who are interested, by the way, Steve Prince, our great friend of the show, head of the Naval Historical Branch down in Portsmouth, he is doing a talk on the Pacific Fleet at We Have Ways Fest this year.
Oh, wonderful.
And he has very interesting things to say about it. And I can't wait. I'm fascinated by it, aren't you?
I'm certainly intrigued because that's a whole chunk of heavy metal, isn't it? That isn't on. I don't think anyone's thinking about ever.
No. There's that great memoir called Carrier Pilot. And it's absolutely just terrific accounts of the aerial action and taking off and landing from aircraft carriers and stuff. And he was in a Corsair. Norman Hanson, that's it, Norman Hanson.
Yeah. So that battle is a British force led by Captain Manly Power. I mean, honestly.
What a great name.
If you're the Power family and you call this some Manly Power, what's his... He's full voltage Manly Power, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Kamikaze escapes rather than sinking, ironically.
Yeah, that's hilarious, isn't it?
This is interesting, isn't it? Because I know people say to us, oh, you got to keep, don't forget the war with Japan's still going. But they tend to mean Burma. They don't mean the Battle of the Malacca Strait.
No.
Forgotten Army are relatively well remembered compared to the Pacific Fleet.
Compared to the British Pacific Fleet.
Yeah. Also, the other thing that's going on is Okinawa is happening at this point.
Yes.
Which is, I think, and we have talked an awful lot about how you have to bear in mind that Okinawa's going on. That this is what's on the American minds, is the kind of fighting that there is in Okinawa and what's to come if they find themselves having to invade the home islands.
Yeah, we did that series, didn't we, on Iwo Jima?
Yeah.
And that was obviously unspeakably brutal and awful and grim. But I think, it's generally held that Okinawa surpassed even that. And we are going to be coming on to Okinawa. We're going to be doing a little 2-parter on that one. But it's absolutely horrific. And the number of civilian casualties caught up with it, the Japanese using them as bait. That's the other thing. Yeah. So they send civilians out at night to trigger the... Because the Americans would have these little sort of tin cans on wires ahead of their lines. And if they sort of tinkled during the night, they'd just open fire. And the Japanese used to send civilians over.
Yeah.
And the next morning, the Americans wake up and they're going to realise that there was a whole load of dead civvies in front of them. 200,000 killed. 200,000.
200,000.
Not wounded, killed.
Yeah.
It's just horrendous.
You've really got to think about those battles before you go, they've lost anyway, or the bombing's working anyway. You've just got to look at those battles and think, that's what you've got to go on, isn't it, if you're the Americans?
Yeah. Not
actually thinking, well, our bombing campaign will work anyway. Because after all, the bombing campaign is the thing that contributes to the defeat of Germany, but isn't the thing that makes the Germans throw in the towel. They have to be defeated politically. They have to be defeated in their capital before they can give up. You've also got, on the 20th, the Georgian uprising on Texel.
Yes.
This is... now, I've been to Texel.
Have you?
Yeah.
Little island.
I did... Yeah, tiny little island, a strip of land on the sort of top right-hand corner of the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
I did some parachute training there. It's very nice place,
Yeah,
very agreeable.
okay.
But this is pronounced Texel in Dutch. This is an uprising by Georgians who've been in the Georgian Legion of the German army, who obviously think...
So they're Wehrmacht, or are they SS?
They're Wehrmacht, 882nd Infantry Battalion, Königin Tamara, Queen Tamara, the Georgian Legion of the German army. And they basically think, no, we've had enough of this. Starts in April, 5th to 6th of April. They rise up and take control of the whole island. And they kill a load of Germans. And then, I just think, why bother?
Yeah.
Germans send in 2,000 Marines to retake the island. Why bother? What's the
Yeah,
point?
it's just extraordinary, isn't it? Just let it run.
And everyone surrender. I mean, it's very weird. And then finally they're mopped up by the Canadians who arrive on the 20th to enforce the German surrender and disarm what's left of the German force there. But I mean, it's bonkers, 565 Georgians are killed, 800 Germans, something like that. And of course, as ever, the locals are caught up in the destruction.
Of course. When it's all supposed to be over.
Yeah,
really frustrating. And then on the 23rd, you've got the Fensburg government is finally dissolved. This is Dönitz and co. Because there's this really weird thing that, Wilhelm Keitel gets flown down by the British from Flensburg to Berlin for the surrender. And then, having had his nice meal and all the rest and got irritated by being kept waiting, he's then flown back to Fensburg. And they're all kind of sort of hanging out. It's a bit like Karl Wolff staying in his place in Bolzano, thinking, well, I might as well have a birthday party then, just waiting for something to happen. And it's the same. And von Freudenberg, who keeps blubbing the whole time, finally realizes that there's no hope and so takes his own life, as does Himmler, of course, who's on the run and takes cyanide. And on that same day, Churchill resigns as Prime Minister.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things about the Flensburg government is, strictly speaking, and Monty points this out at one point, is strictly speaking, because they fall within the area that's surrendered to him, and because they're service personnel, because they're all officers, they're actually prisoners of war. And there is no government. There's no thing with no authority. And, Ike hasn't recognised the Flensburg government either. So there's it's a weird place in a strange flux. I also think when people say, Hitler got away, well, how well did Himmler do in escaping? He was recognised immediately, wasn't he? I mean, the idea
he's got no chin and he's so obvious.
He's been on so many newspaper front pages and in newsreel that everyone knows who he is.
Yeah. Little
wonder he got caught up with. So which always suggests to me that the most famous man in the world would have had a problem trying to escape.
Yes.
Himmler says, no, I am merely a sergeant, doesn't he? No one's fooled for a moment.
No.
And then I think what's interesting is the political situation in London. What happens is there's the Labour Party conference in May, immediately following the VE Day. And the Labour government says, the Labour part of the government, the national government says, the war in Europe's over. We can't support the national government anymore. We've got to pull the plug on it. And Churchill offers a referendum on the idea that they should carry on with a national government to Labour. Attlee says, referenda, I'm afraid, have only too often been the instrument of Nazism and fascism, and says no. Absolutely puts his foot down.
Well, ain't that ever true?
Well, but isn't it interesting, though? Because I think one of the things people definitely know about the khaki election, and we're going to do an episode about it, is that Churchill famously says that socialism will require a new Gestapo, right? And that he's widely abhorred for the use of such language. And that people are shocked and disgusted by it. But there's Attlee flinging the same snowball with gravel at Churchill in the opposite direction. And no one seems to mind. Yeah. It's Labour who insist on the election. Beaverbrook at one point, because Churchill's basically talking to Beaverbrook mainly in the 45 election, who says, personally, I think there shouldn't be an election and you should carry on and we shouldn't bother with one, which I think is amazing. Absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, isn't it?
And even Churchill has to say, and Churchill says, well, no, we can't do that, I'm afraid. But we'll be talking about the khaki election. But it's Labour who say, no, now's the time. And what's quite interesting is you have servicemen who then, because it's difficult to organise the vote for everyone overseas, servicemen who are annoyed and they wish that Labour had waited until the autumn because it's all a bit of a scramble to get their votes registered and stuff. Quite clearly, the people...
Well, he's probably got a point.
He's got a point. But at least people have had enough. They're done. And the politics around that is quite interesting.
Well, I'm looking forward to chatting about that one. Khaki elections.
What else have we got?
Berlin Philharmonic performs its first post-war concert. The Berlin Philharmonic is still an incredibly internationally famous symphony orchestra and was before the war. And, it's amazing that it performs on the 26th of May, I think, in the Titania Palace. And it's conducted by Leo Borchardt.
Yes.
And Leo Borchardt, of course, is the husband of Ruth Andreas Friedrich.
Yeah.
Who we talked about, we wrote about in Victory 45 and who we talked about in our V-Day 45 series. And he was living under a different name, under a sort of Russian name. And it's a terrible story because just after this, he is being driven by a British major. He and Ruth are being driven by a British major in an open-top car through Berlin.
Yeah.
And the major doesn't stop at a British barrier. And so the British soldier, the guard, opens fire and he gets killed.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so they've survived the war, doing incredibly dangerous stuff, being resistors to the regime throughout the war. They've lived through this, survived the whole thing, and then he gets shot by a British sentry.
Oh, God, I don't believe it.
After a concert.
Oh, my God.
But he's conducted a concert and is killed afterwards. Yeah, no, it's August. He's got another couple of months.
So it's a couple of
August,
months later.
Again. Yeah. Do
we know what they played? There must be a way of finding out the concert program.
I think you can safely say it's probably not Wagner.
Have these people all got their violins? Have they all buried their violins? And is his baton in the loft? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, so apparently it's an overture to Mendelssohn's A Midsummer Night's Dream, Mozart's Violin Concerto in A Major, and Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 4. So some Russian music. That's politic, isn't it?
Well, there you go. So there's quite a lot going on in May, isn't there still? The war might be over, but there's no shortage of events. You just can't get to the end of a sort of the most cataclysmic global conflict of all time and just it all neatly just resolve itself.
No. Should we take a break, and then afterwards we'll do some questions from our listeners? We'll see you in a moment.
McCrispy strips are now at McDonald's. I hope you're ready for the most dippable chicken in McDonald's history. Dip it in all the sauces. Dip it in that hot sauce in your bag. Dip it in your McFlurry. Your dip is your business. McCrispy strips at McDonald's.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast. The NBA playoffs are here, and Michelob Ultra is getting you closer to the game than ever with courtside seats and more. Enter now at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access Courtside 2024 to 2025 sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Ends on July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/superior access/courtside for free entry deadlines and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
This episode is brought to you by PetSmart. Stop by for Yappy Hour with your pet at PetSmart. Save $5 on walk-in grooming services like nail trims, ear cleaning, brushing, and more. No appointment needed every weekday from 2 to 6 p.m. And while you're there, Yappy Hour includes exclusive in-store deals like 25% off pet toys. Visit services.petsmart.com/grooming to learn more.
Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. We've been talking about, because the point we made just there, or you just made, Jim, is that, yes, you can't expect it to all just wind down immediately. But it is, of course, going full tilt still in the war against Japan. And I just want to make sure that everyone gets that message. We're not for 1 second saying
it was another 3 months ago, but they didn't know that then.
They didn't know that then. We may know that now, but they didn't know that then.
No.
Right. Now we've some questions. Tom Bonfield on our Patreon. Thanks for that, Tom, for joining our Patreon. Asks, what books about Hitler would the podcast recommend, please? Other than the obvious Kershaw, McDonough, and Ulrich.
Well, I would recommend those.
Yeah.
They're really good. If you want something incredibly dense and authoritative, Richard Evans. Yeah, well, there's Richard Evans, who hasn't written specifically about Hitler, but you can't sort of disengage the Nazis from Hitler, and he has written extensively about the Nazis. And Richard Evans is widely considered to be the great academic on this subject. I would slightly question his understanding of the military aspect of the war, but, he is the top dog on this, really. And so it's worth looking at. If you want a little bit of sort of lighter reading, I would recommend the novel Look Who's Back, which is unspeakably funny, and I think was published in 2013, if I remember rightly. And the concept of this is that Hitler wakes up in a parking lot in Berlin in 2012 or something, and it's a sort of it's just very, very, very funny because it's all written in the first person.
With his voice.
So it's written by Hitler with his voice, and he just absolutely nails it. It's uncomfortably funny. But if you want to read about the death of Hitler, there is a book called The Death of Hitler, and it's really, really good. And there's Luke Daly Grove's book as well about the end and the conspiracy theories and stuff. Oh, that's quite interesting.
I would recommend, it's a book from quite a while ago now. It's quite old now, called The Hitler of History by John Lukács. And people might know John Lukács from his book 5 Days in London, May 1940.
Yeah, 5 days in May, yeah.
Yeah, which is about Churchill and Halifax and that cabinet deciding to fight on. Because Lukács, he says, that's the most important 5 days in world history and all this sort of thing. But he wrote a book called The Hitler of History, which is about, it's from the late 90s. So like as I said, it would be great if someone were to do this again now.
It's a really, really good book.
It's really clever. And he parses all the different ways that people have tried to deal with Hitler as history. Like, where do you put him? How do you place him in the continuity? What is he? Is he an aberration? Is he an intentionalist? Is he the German id, the German ego? What on earth is he? And how do we fit him into history? And if I remember rightly, I think that he kind of concludes that what Hitler is a warning about democracy, about giving people what they want, offering people something terrible and them saying, yes, please. I would recommend enormously because it's just so thought-provoking and about how so often with historiography, sometimes you're not aware of it because the way history's written, it fits the time it's written and it just doesn't occur to you that there's a ghost of the historiography in what you're reading or what you're experiencing. And he's just absolutely brilliant at it.
I think that's a great recommendation. I haven't thought about that book for a decade. And I've got it somewhere and I must dig it out because you're right. It's an absolutely brilliant book.
I'm pretty certain it's out of print, but you can pick it up.
You'll get it on ABE Books, won't you?
Yeah. Seriously, I would recommend it to absolutely anybody because it's getting you to think and to be thought-provoking about kind of a thing we think we have got a place for. And the fact that obviously he's saying, look, if you're German, how on earth do you digest the events and the man who represents those events? And I think I'd recommend that. Rather than a biography, because Tom's question, in a way, is asking for something other than the obvious Kershaw, McDonough, Ulrichs, and
I think that's a really great shout. And I would recommend The Death of Hitler as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Now I've got the name of the authors. It's Jean-Christophe Brizard, Brisard, and Lana Parshina, Parshina. It's an absolute romp. And of course, there's Luke Daly Groves' book as well, which is a case against
which is fantastic.
Conspiracy.
Yeah. And it's really funny. It's funny, Luke's book too, because it's got that element of complete farce and the poor sods, in the various secret services or FBI, whatever, just having to deal with yet another guy going, I saw Hitler, I know where he is. Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, this next one, a question from Leobal. This is right up your current stratagem, I would say. And again, this is on Patreon. Before listening to this, I watched a piece about Russia's military and population crisis, exacerbated by the missing generation of World War II. I wonder if the Soviet generals, particularly Zhukov, would have been more careful if they'd known what a massive, decades-long crisis the Butcher's Bill would cause.
No, I don't think they'd have been any more careful. I think it's just built into their DNA that they can just be incredibly profligate with people's lives. I mean, the inherent cruelty of the Russian war machine really has to be... We're so hardwired now, the terrible sacrifice of the Red Army, and this is where the most blood was spilt in the Second World War and blah, 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 and the Great Patriotic War and all the rest of it. What hasn't happened? There hasn't been a reckoning on why it was so bloody. Okay, now part of it is because the Nazis came in and, torched villages and all the rest of it. But a very large part of it was down to the Soviet leadership, both military and political. Woefully abject military command in 1941 and into 1942. I mean, really just unbelievably bad. I mean, why don't you just sort of send an idiot to command these these armies? I mean, just terrible.
Yeah. The
scorched earth policy during retreat, which all that did was just kill even more people. I mean, what one has to appreciate is that, when you're getting to kind of 25 million people in the Soviet Union killed during World War II, a large number of those are killed through disease and starvation.
Yeah.
And that is a direct consequence of the actions both of the German armed forces and the Red Army.
Yeah.
It's not just the Germans. I mean, the Germans, as we know, were unspeakably cruel and ideologically driven and all the rest of it. But, the Soviet leadership has blood on its hands as well. Then when it comes to military losses, the military losses are out of all proportion to the scales of the battles they were fighting, which were admittedly large. And I've said it before, but let's just reiterate again. The final battle, 16th of April, 1945, when it's launched. The Red Army has 3 army groups three groups of armies. The First Belarusian Front, the Second Belarusian Front, the First Ukrainian Front. It has overwhelming numbers. It has 41,000 artillery pieces, thousands of tanks, thousands of aircraft, every bit of equipment and millions of shells stockpiled. And they are fighting against a totally defeated German army. Yes, there are some veterans there. Yes, there are some Waffen-SS units. But as we've already proved in many discussions, these are no longer brilliantly trained troops. And a large number of the troops they're facing are Volkssturm. And these are troops that have had, 1, 2, 3 days, a week's training. We gave that example of Helmut Altner, a kind of 17-year-old who's basically 3 days training and then off to the front. So there is no excuse for a butcher's bill of 900,000 casualties in a little over two weeks. I mean, you can only conclude that the reason there were that many casualties in the Red Army in the final battles for Berlin was through extreme recklessness on the part of the commanders, of which Zhukov was the number one villain.
But there's definitely, within the Stavka, there's definitely the sense that if you're not taking casualties, you aren't trying hard enough, isn't there? There is no steel, not flesh mentality at all. And I think we've talked about that. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you've heard steel, not flesh more often than you've heard Big Mac and cheese, I think, in your life. I mean, we have reiterated that point over and over and over again. And that policy works on the Germans, comprehensively defeats the Germans. You don't need to defeat the Germans any other way. And obviously, air is a huge part of the way the Allies approach things. The Soviets are only really able to achieve tactical air superiorities because of the Western Allied effort to dominate the skies wherever they're present. The strategic bombing campaign isn't just, it's often framed, isn't it, as it's showing Stalin that we're in the war. Well, actually what it's doing is destroying the Luftwaffe. Thanks very much. It's not just a gesture. Well,
in the same time, in the summer of between June and October 1943, the Luftwaffe loses 3,405 aircraft in the Mediterranean and 702 on the Soviet Union, on the Eastern Front.
Yeah. The Soviets are being offered advantage by the way the Western Allies are fighting, by drawing planes. Stalingrad, the Soviets are able to command the sky there because basically the Luftwaffe has had to go and deal with what else is going on in North Africa, for instance. And even then, even with that sort of aerial advantage, the way they fight there.
I mean, it's 800,000 casualties in Operation Bagration. It's 640,000 casualties for the Oder-Vistula campaign at the beginning of the year. Then 900,000 casualties in the final battle for Berlin. Let's not face it, okay? That is the 16th of April to the 2nd of May. And nearly 1 million troops become casualties in a little over 2 weeks. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And what I find absolutely amazing is why historians haven't questioned this. It's just always it's always written in terms of the kind of huge sacrifice of the Red Armies. Why isn't someone saying, do you know what, maybe the Red Army was just extremely incompetent and careless and reckless and cruel.
Really appallingly led.
Yeah.
If you want to ascribe responsibility, it goes all the way to the top, doesn't it? And I think what's really interesting, though, on top of this, there is a missing generation of World War II, Russia's military population crisis. And one of the things that happens in the 70s in the Soviet Union is because communism plainly hasn't delivered. The Brezhnev government recenters the Great Patriotic War in Soviet culture, kind of as the reason we may not have achieved the workers' paradise yet. But look, communism was good for defeating the Nazis. It defeated Nazism. And so it is worth it. But when you look at what that defeat took and the recklessness and the sheer expenditure of life to get there, obviously it was worth defeating the Nazis. I mean, again, you end up having to say these things that sort of horrible truisms, don't you? And I saw enough of it online on social media last week going, well, what did Britain ever do? That sort of, what did Britain ever do? The Soviets lost far more people. Well, is that necessarily a good thing? Because after all, and I think I've said it before when we've talked about this in the past, if they'd had their act together, they'd have been in Paris by the spring of 1944. If they'd found a steel, not flesh way of fighting the Germans, the Soviets, they'd be at Calais, wouldn't they?
Possibly, yeah. But they were never going to fight that way because they're just
I know.
I mean, that's like saying, well, if only Hitler had gone into the Soviet Union without his ideology. I mean, it's just
exactly. You take the words
of
right
course,
out of my mouth.
But then you're not. then they wouldn't have gone to war in the first place because they wouldn't have been those people.
No, of course. Anyway, but yes, that's a ball worth kicking around. That be interested to know what people think. Actually, other opinions on that, and I'm sure there might be a Russian listener going, "How listen to you two Western idiots? How dare you?" Jeff from Patreon asks, does that make a wigeon a fleet air arm asset or coastal command? Well, we were talking about wigeons. Wigeon's a kind of water pigeon, isn't it? Yeah, it's a coastal command, I think. It's not fleet air arm. Land-bound. Sometimes, I mean, we've made many of these podcasts. There's things I forgot we've ever covered and said and done. And the wigeon...
I forgot we had a debate over a wigeon, I have to say.
Operation Wigeon, wasn't it? It was part of the plunder stuff.
Yes. That's all coming back now.
Yeah.
I think a wigeon's a type of duck.
That's right. It's a type of duck.
Yeah, but it's not like an aqua pigeon.
Well, it sounds like it is.
Well, it might sound like it, but it isn't.
A water dove. Yeah, the dove from
a water
above.
Pigeon. It's a duck.
Richard Stott asks, any recommendations for a Truman biography?
Yes, 100%. David McCulloch. He's a legendary American writer, and he wrote a biography simply called Truman, and it won the Pulitzer Prize, and it's magnificent. Right. It's big and chunky, so my recommendation would be read up about his early life on Wikipedia and then cut to his nomination as VP and stuff in the summer of 1944 is absolutely fascinating. The road to the end of the war, him taking over as president, and then the whole stuff from kind of 1946 is just amazing because, his popularity dipped massively. And there were huge strikes in the United States, just as there had been in 1943, incidentally. People always forget about these. There was a huge strike on the railroads, and it was absolutely catastrophic for him. And then he had this. And then he had a shift of he sort of changed his cabinet around, and actually Jimmy Burns was moved on as Secretary of State, and that's when he brings in General Marshall as a Secretary of State, and it's one of the best moves he makes. And General Marshall proves to be every bit as brilliant as a Secretary of State, even if not even better than he is as Chief of Staff of the U.S. Armed Forces during the Second World War. It is because he commands so much respect. And because Marshall just has this quiet persona that just oozes authority, moral probity, sagacity. No one will quibble with him, and he's cross-party. So he has no political party allegiance, even though he's Secretary of State under a Democratic president. Every time him smiles, everyone just agrees with it, which if you're president is very useful. And he's exceptional. He's exceptional at what he does. But before he becomes Secretary of State, he's been sent to try and sort out China. Makes an absolute hash of it. Doesn't work at all. So in a way, it's quite a bold move to then make him Secretary of State. But what he can't achieve in China, no one could. So he comes back kind of sort of humbled by this and sort of, confidence shaken. But then Truman makes him Secretary of State, and it's just a genius decision. And they are kind of wedded to the hip thereafter, and out of that comes all sorts of amazing things.
Yeah, a ton of Roosevelt's effort is trying to make sure stuff's cross-party, though, isn't it? So Marshall, because he has no allegiance, he's a much easier conduit for trying to pull that off, isn't he?
Yeah,
easier sell, I suppose.
But the David McCulloch biography is amazing. It's very, very readable, very authoritative, and it was reading this that made me kind of think, oh, what an amazing guy he was.
Let's wrap up because we've got lots to tease, as we say.
Yeah,
we've got some stuff to come. Episodes around the ideas of visions of peace. What's the Attlee government, the post-war world, going to be like? We want to look at that. We're going to look at the khaki election, of course, as we've said. What's happening in Burma, where the greatest combined operations, British-led combined arms operations of the war, I think you could argue happen, because they're not necessarily British after all. You've got lots of African soldiers and Indian soldiers and all sorts. Hiroshima, VJ Day. And we're going to look at Nuremberg, I think. We're going to try and look at justice at Nuremberg.
At some point.
There's the Winter War to look at. We also, of course, because let's be honest now, the Second World War is this giant anniversary machine. It's an ever-turning clock of anniversaries. And it's Dunkirk again soon, and the Battle of Britain. So we thought what we do is have another look at those.
Well, I was very keen to do a home-in on the week of the 7th to the 15th of September, particularly if you go into very forensic detail on Sunday, the 15th of September, 1940. I think that would be interesting for people because I know we've done the Battle of Britain before, but we haven't done it in quite that kind of forensic level where we're going through a bit like we did with the Battle of the North Cape, where it was like, minute by minute, hour by hour, kind of what is happening and what's going on. I think that would be fun. So we're going to do that.
We've got some live streams to come. We're going to be running a series up to coincide with the festival in September called Best in the West.
The Generals.
And what we're going to do is a sort of World Cup of generals in the West. Why in the West? Mainly to avoid you all voting for Slim, obviously.
Well, we can do the best in the East as well at another time.
We'll get around to that, but we were trying to avoid such a calamity.
Yeah.
Because basically, James wants Monty to win. I want Alex to win. Did I get that right? Or is that the wrong way around, ladies and gentlemen? And what we're going to do is a kind of World Cup of generals, present the case, argue them. You can vote, and we'll see who comes out tops when we get to the festival in September.
And that does include Germans, by the way.
That does include Germans, yes. But bear in mind, they're always marked down on the grounds of having lost. They can have as much tactical flair as you like, but they're on the losing side.
Yeah, but we can still vote for the best German general in the West. And it can't be Rommel. And it certainly won't be Kesselring.
See, he started already, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, thanks very much for listening, everybody. We will see you all very soon. Thanks for listening, and cheerio.
Cheerio.